The gavel slammed against the podium like a thunderclap. People stood in my yard, strangers with bidding paddles, laughing, talking, pointing. They thought this was just another foreclosure auction. Another broken man losing his home to the system. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Inside, my daughter held on to her mother, crying, staring out the window at the madness unraveling on our front lawn. My teenage son clenched his fists, rage trembling through him as men in polos with clipboards labeled HOA Board strutted around like kings. 3 weeks earlier, everything had been quiet, peaceful. Then the first letter came. A fine $2.50 for a non-compliant mailbox. The mailbox I had personally rebuilt after a drunk driver smashed it. I shrugged it off. The next day, another fine. Grass too high by half an inch. Then, missing garbage lid. Then, vehicle parked improperly in my own driveway. By the end of the week, the fines totaled over $3,000. I called. I emailed. I knocked on their office door. Nothing. Not a single answer. Until a certified envelope arrived. Bold red letters. Notice of foreclosure and auction date set. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about rules. This was targeted. Someone wanted me off this land. I served my country. 20 years, multiple operations. I carried brothers off battlefields and held the line when no one else could. And now some clipboard warrior wanted to steal my home over a trash lid? No, not today. I opened the drawer. My badge gleamed under the light, a symbol they didn't know I carried, one they were going to regret provoking. But before I could act, the pressure started closing in. Neighbors turned cold. One crossed the street when I stepped outside. Another stopped speaking to my wife altogether. One night, I caught a man taking pictures of our backyard, then speeding off. At 3 a.m., my son found our flag torn off its pole. It wasn't random. It was war. And the worst part, my daughter's birthday was days away. She asked if we were moving. She asked if her toys would come with her. She asked if we were being punished. That broke something inside me. Listen, if you've ever been pushed to the edge, if you've ever had people try to erase everything you've built, then you know what I felt. They thought they could auction off my life, my memories, my history. But what they didn't know was that I am the law they fear. And before I continue this story, I need you to do something important. If you believe in standing up to corruption, in fighting for your family, and never backing down when it matters most, then hit that like button. Drop a comment if you've ever faced HOA abuse. And subscribe because what's about to happen next, it's going to restore your faith in justice, asterisk, asterisk. Back to that day. As the auctioneer raised his hand to open bidding, I walked through the crowd. Calm, silent, controlled. People turned, confused. Some recognized me. Others didn't. I stepped up to the porch. The HOA president, Karen Holloway, smirked, arms crossed like she'd already won. But I didn't say a word. I just reached into my jacket and pulled out the badge. Yes, silence, then tension. Karen's smile cracked for the first time. Today, I said, you're not taking anything. Because this house, this family, this story, it's not over. It's just getting started. Karen Holloway didn't say a word when she saw the badge. Her face froze, smug confidence melting into confusion. Around her, the HOA board shifted uncomfortably, whispering, fidgeting, unsure whether to proceed or retreat. The auctioneer looked from me to her, then back to the crowd. His voice cracked slightly. Opening bid starts at... Don't, I said calmly. He put the gavel down. That moment wasn't about theatrics. It was about control. About letting them know they had just stepped into a fight they weren't qualified for. I turned and walked off the porch, crowd parting like water. No one spoke. No one dared. But inside, I was already boiling. Because this wasn't just an overstep, it was a calculated move. And I knew exactly who was behind it. 3 years ago, during a multi-jurisdictional warrant sweep, I led a task force that brought down a major interstate drug pipeline. Among the names caught in the operation was Marcus Holloway, Karen's younger brother. Federal time. Multiple charges. That takedown humiliated a powerful family. I didn't know it at the time, but Karen had just been elected HOA president the same month her brother went away. And now here we were. I went back inside, sat at my kitchen table, and opened the thick stack of violation notices and fake fines again. The language was overly formal, cold, and meticulous. Too perfect. This wasn't sloppiness. It was weaponized bureaucracy. I spread the notices across the table, one by one. Same signature on every page, K. Holloway. My wife poured me a cup of coffee without a word. The silence between us was heavy, weighted with fear and disbelief. Our kids were still upstairs. They didn't need to see what came next. I called a contact at the Marshal's office. He answered instantly. She's pushing for foreclosure? On what grounds? Fake ones, I said. Fabricated fines. Forged documents. I need background. I'll run the HOA board through federal records, he said. You might not like what we find. While I waited, I visited the one neighbor who hadn't turned his back, Gregory. Greg was a disabled veteran, lived 2 houses down. His property had been cited too, but he never talked about it. He opened the door slowly. His eyes told me he already knew why I was there. They came to me last year, he said. Told me if I didn't file a complaint against you, they blocked my disability ramp approval. Said you were dangerous, unstable. I didn't do it, but others did. That was the crack in the dam. If they coerced one, they coerced more. I started pulling footage from my own home surveillance. Cameras I had installed, not just for protection, but as habit. Years of law enforcement make you paranoid for a reason. What I found stunned me. Footage from 2 weeks ago showed a man walking through my side gate at night, taking photos with a clipboard. He was wearing an HOA shirt. But what made my blood run cold was that he had a police radio on his belt. That wasn't standard. That was private security gear. I zoomed in, paused. Badge clipped to his vest, T. Garrison, HOA Security. I didn't know the name, but I knew the look. Ex-military or ex-something. And not someone who belonged near my family. The next morning, a notice appeared on my door. Unauthorized surveillance. Cease and desist or face further penalties. They were watching me watch them. At that point, I knew this wasn't about a lawn or mailbox. It was a takedown. A systematic attempt to remove me from my own home and smear everything I built. But they underestimated the one thing that couldn't be bought, bribed, or broken. Me. And before I continue, let me ask you something real. If you've ever been cornered, lied about, or had your name dragged through the mud by people in power, drop a comment. Hit that like button. And subscribe right now because what I'm about to uncover will shake you. Asterisk, asterisk. I walked into the HOA office that afternoon. No badge, no backup, just determination. Karen was there, sipping from a porcelain mug like it was just another Tuesday. She didn't even look up. I'm requesting a full audit of the HOA's financials and violation records for this community, I said. You're not entitled to that, she replied. I placed a printed copy of the federal HOA compliant statute on her desk. She looked up. For the first time, her eyes flickered with real fear. Unless you're hiding something, I added. She didn't respond. But the next morning, someone slashed all 4 tires on my truck. The war was escalating, and I was just getting started. I stood next to my truck, staring at the 4 slashed tires, the rubber curling like skin pulled back from a wound. A message without a signature. But I didn't need one. They wanted to immobilize me, silence me, frustrate me into backing down. But I've kicked down doors in war zones. I've walked through worse. I called it in anyway, made a police report, though the officer seemed nervous taking my statement. He didn't write much, didn't take photos, didn't even walk around the truck. When I asked if the HOA was under investigation, he just said, "You're not the first complaint, but you are the loudest." That told me everything. Something deeper was rotting in this town. Back home, I pulled out the thick binder I'd been building. Copies of every notice, letter, timestamp photos, security footage stills, HOA regulations, state statutes. What I needed now wasn't just evidence. It was a break. Then it came from the unlikeliest place. My daughter ran into the kitchen, holding a piece of folded paper. "This was taped under my window," she said. It was a note. No name. Just a line of handwriting. "Check the treasurer's files." Not everything adds up. I knew who the treasurer was. Nancy Whitaker. Quiet, always in Karen's shadow. Never voted. Never smiled. That night, I parked 2 blocks away and walked to the HOA office. I didn't break in. I didn't need to. I waited. At 11:52 p.m., Nancy left through the side door. Alone. She moved like someone with a secret. I followed. She walked behind the community center and lit a cigarette. When she turned and saw me, her face drained of color. "I didn't write the note," she said before I could speak. "But I know what it's about." "What's going on, Nancy?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she broke. "There's a fund. Karen's been funneling HOA dues into a personal account. It's hidden under landscape upgrades and legal fees, but the numbers don't match. I found it last quarter. Why didn't you say anything?" She looked down. "Because she knows things about my son. About what he did as a teenager. She said she'd release the report if I talked. That was the game. Leverage. Fear. I asked her for access. She gave me a password. I went home and logged into the HOA's financial portal. Line after line of inflated charges, vendor names with no history, payments to a security firm, Garrison Tactical Solutions. The same name on the badge I saw in the surveillance footage. I cross-referenced the EIN numbers. Fake. Every single one. The next morning, I took it to a federal contact. He confirmed my suspicions. Karen wasn't just corrupt, she was orchestrating an illegal racket using HOA law as her weapon. And it was about to explode. But before I could take legal action, a letter came. This one wasn't printed. It was hand-delivered. No return address. Inside was a single page, notice of permanent removal from HOA grounds, effective immediately. It claimed I had threatened board members, that I was under investigation, that I was barred from entering my own home pending further disciplinary hearings. My name was now officially blacklisted in the place I paid taxes, raised children, and bled for. I walked out to the street to find a crowd of HOA patrol and private security standing outside my gate. One of them held up the letter. "You've been removed, sir." I didn't say a word. I just reached into my coat and pulled out my badge. "I don't think you understand what authority means," I said. Then I walked past them and into my house, unbothered. But the next twist wasn't in their hands. It came from someone inside my own walls. That evening, my son came into my office, eyes wide, holding his phone. Look at this. It was a video, grainy, low quality, recorded from behind a fence. It showed Karen meeting with a man in a luxury car, exchanging envelopes. I paused the footage. It was the same man whose name was on a deed of sale document that had just been filed that morning. They had sold my house to him without my consent, without my knowledge, using forged documents and HOA emergency powers. And in 3 days, he would legally own my property. But this was far from over. Because if they wanted a war over this house, they just made it federal. 3 days. That's what the forged deed said. In 72 hours, my home, my land, would legally transfer to the man in the black Mercedes. And unless I acted fast, the house I built with my own hands would be gone under the veil of legality and corruption. I didn't panic. I prepared. I met with a federal property crimes prosecutor first thing that morning. I laid it all out. Falsified notices, slashed tires, manipulated board votes, surveillance, the financial records Nancy provided, and now fraudulent title transfer. He listened, silent the entire time. When I finished, he only said 5 words. "We're taking this to court." The hearing was rushed, urgent, and sudden. But even before it began, I could see the game Karen was playing. She had hired a high-profile real estate attorney, the kind who wore $10,000 watches and smiled too wide. He kept adjusting his cufflinks like he was about to walk onto a stage. Opposite him stood my federal team, no theatrics, just black suits and truth. The judge entered, gray-bearded, eyes sharp. The courtroom silenced like a snapped wire. Karen sat with her team, arms crossed, eyes full of venom. Her attorney went first. He spun a web of lies, called me volatile, said I'd missed HOA meetings intentionally, that I'd been fined multiple times, that I was unresponsive and confrontational. Then he presented their masterstroke, the signed waiver, a document claiming I had voluntarily relinquished my rights to the property in exchange for community peace. The judge looked at it. then looked at me. I stood. Your Honor, I've never seen that document, and I can prove it. My attorney handed over the real timeline. Surveillance footage, IP logs, digital timestamps. The HOA's internal activity logs Nancy had accessed. Every single thing they had submitted was forged. And when we pulled the metadata from the signed PDF they had provided, the creation time and author were revealed. Karen Holloway. The courtroom shifted. Karen stood up furious. This is harassment. He's retaliating against me because the judge cut her off. Enough. Then he turned to her attorney. Your client has submitted falsified documentation in a federal proceeding. You may want to speak with your legal team before continuing. That was the moment everything cracked. Karen's composure broke. She turned to whisper furiously to her lawyer, her voice shaking. Her carefully polished image shattered in front of a packed courtroom. But the moment of true silence came next. Because from the back of the courtroom, a man rose. Broad shoulders, federal badge visible on his belt. He handed the judge a sealed envelope. Inside, arrest warrants. Karen Holloway, T. Garrison, 2 HOA board members, 1 title agent, ***. Charges, wire fraud, document forgery, racketeering, real estate theft, conspiracy. Karen was handcuffed right there in court. As the deputies led her away, she looked back at me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something colder, something unfinished. This isn't over, she hissed. But she was wrong, because what happened next went public. A local journalist in the courtroom broke the story within an hour, and by evening, it hit regional headlines. Federal sting uncovers HOA corruption network. Whistleblower is U.S. Marshal. Suddenly, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months were leaving baked goods on our porch. People apologized. Quietly, awkwardly, but sincerely. Even Greg, who'd been threatened into silence, stood at my door with tears in his eyes. I should have had your back. I nodded. Now we hold the rest accountable. That night, for the first time in weeks, my family sat down for dinner without fear. But while Karen was in custody, the deeper part of her network wasn't. Because when I checked the email linked to the title company she used, a bounce-back message appeared. The address was scrubbed. The server was foreign. And suddenly a second name popped up. A man I hadn't seen in 15 years. A man I helped arrest during my time in narcotics enforcement. A man who had vowed revenge. Karen wasn't the mastermind. She was the front. And the real threat had just begun watching. Before we continue, if this story has you locked in, take 2 seconds right now. Hit that like button, subscribe for part 5, and comment below what you do if someone tried to auction your home. Your voice matters, and the story's only getting deeper from here. The name that popped up in the metadata chilled me to the bone, Diego Marin. 15 years ago, he ran a laundering pipeline through shell real estate firms, used HOA bylaws to seize land in under-policed neighborhoods, and left bodies behind when things got messy. I was one of the agents who cracked his empire. He vanished before the indictments hit, and now his fingerprints were all over the forged title of my house. This wasn't about a neighborhood feud anymore. This was revenge. I contacted a friend still active in the Marshals. He dug into encrypted property databases and flagged something instantly. Diego's alias had reemerged in South Dakota 2 years ago. New ID. New company. A real estate development front that specialized in, ironically, HOA takeovers. Karen wasn't working alone. She was recruited. Her downfall was collateral. I stared at the screen. Diego was watching from the shadows, and I had just stepped back into his game. I warned my family to be cautious, changed our routines, set up private security with people I trusted from the agency. But it wasn't enough, because the very next morning, my daughter's school called. She hadn't shown up. Neither had her phone, backpack, or GPS watch. I felt the air leave my lungs. Every instinct, every training drill snapped to life. I called in every contact I had, activated local alerts, and within an hour, surveillance footage from the school's rear exit showed her getting into a black van. No plates. No hesitation. She thought it was safe. Then a message arrived. An untraceable number. Just 2 lines. You took my empire. I'll take your legacy. I fell to my knees in silence. Then I got up, because the fear couldn't last. Not now. I went straight to the federal field office and requested a Level 3 tactical intercept. Normally, it would take approvals, bureaucracy, hours of delay. But when I showed them the footage, the name Diego Marin, and the forged HOA connection, they moved fast. One of the analysts tracked the last ping from my daughter's GPS before it went dark, an abandoned storage facility 30 miles out of town. We rode in black SUVs with sirens off. Every second was a war inside my chest. When we arrived, the place looked dead, rusted padlocks, sand-blown windows, no signs of life. But inside, behind one false wall, was a soundproof room. She was there, safe, shaken but untouched, and taped to the inside of the door, a single sheet of paper. Next time I won't miss. You're in my world now. Diego had left her as a message. He could reach me whenever he wanted. But now, so could I. Because the tracker embedded in her watch, it had failed to send location, but not data. And the last handshake signal it exchanged logged a unique Bluetooth signature. That signature led to a burner phone that pinged 2 hours later in Los Angeles. We had him. At least we thought we did. When we raided the address linked to the signal, all we found was a wall of screens, live feeds from over a dozen neighborhoods, and in the center, a 3D map of my own property. He was still watching, still inside the system. This wasn't a vendetta. This was an operation. And it wasn't just targeting me. Because on the screen next to my house were properties marked across 5 states, all seized under HOA emergency bylaws, all owned quietly by his front company. I stood in that room surrounded by my past, my present, and every mistake that had led here. And I made a choice. It was time to go public. I called a journalist I trusted. And then I recorded a video. I sat on my front porch, badge beside me, holding the court files, the arrest warrants, and the photo of Diego Marin. I told the story from the beginning. How it started with a parking citation. How it led to forged auctions, false charges, and federal corruption. How the man behind it all wasn't done. I ended it with one line. I'm not the only one. Look around. This might be your HOA next. The video went viral overnight. Millions of views. Thousands of messages. And hidden among them was one name. A whistleblower. A former employee of Diego's company. He had documents. He wanted to meet. But he said one thing that caught me off guard. You were never the target. Your badge was the key. Before we go deeper, hit like if this had your heart racing, subscribe for what comes next, and drop a comment. What would you do if a crime syndicate used your neighborhood as cover? Part 6 is where everything unravels. He wanted to meet at dawn, just outside an old rail yard on the edge of the city. Neutral ground, open space, one exit. I didn't go in blind. 2 agents backed me from a parked sedan, and a surveillance drone hovered out of sight. But when I saw him, nervous, shaking, clutching a messenger bag like it held the last safe truth on Earth, I knew he was real. His name was Colin Reyes, former systems analyst for DTX Holdings, Diego's shell corporation. Fired a year ago. Been in hiding since. And what he handed me shattered everything I thought I knew. Inside the bag were encrypted flash drives, bank records, scan memos, and voice logs. But what mattered most was a 37-page internal document titled Red Flag Acquisition Protocol. It was Diego's playbook. And it was bigger than I feared. They weren't just seizing properties. They were identifying homes owned by current or former law enforcement, especially those with clearance access or retired federal credentials. Why? Because those homes weren't just valuable, they were shields. Legal shields. Using forged HOA rules and rushed auctions, Diego's people could transfer ownership, scrub digital trails, and use the properties as drop zones, data laundering hubs, or safe houses, all without raising suspicion. No one would question a quiet suburban house with a retired Marshal listed on the deed. I wasn't the end game. I was step 1, asterisk asterisk. And worse, there were 12 others like me already compromised. One of them, I had gone missing 2 weeks ago. We didn't have time. I rushed the files to the federal task force. Within hours, teams were deployed to secure the flagged homes. 3 of them had surveillance bugs hidden in walls. One had a basement floor recently replaced. Beneath it, a cache of unregistered weapons and crypto wallets. This was organized, surgical, and spreading. But Colin wasn't finished. He leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. There's one more file. I didn't bring it. I couldn't. It's the list. What list? I asked. He paused. Everyone who's next. Judges, agents, prosecutors. They're not just taking homes. They're building a network inside the system. I felt the blood drain from my face. He told me where the file was, an offshore backup synced from Diego's personal laptop years ago. Still dormant, untouched, and only accessible with a biometric key. Diego's fingerprint. But then came the twist that pulled the ground from under me. Colin said, there's one other fingerprint authorized on that system. Yours. I stared at him, unable to process. Diego had cloned my prints. Back when we arrested him, I remembered he grabbed my wrist during processing. It was subtle, lasted a second. He planned this 15 years ago. This wasn't revenge. It was design. And now the system believed I was a co-signer to his empire. If I didn't act soon, Diego could vanish and leave me as the digital heir to every crime his network committed. The frame-up wasn't coming. It had already started. Because that night, I got a knock on the door. Federal agents. But they weren't mine. They were internal affairs. And they had a warrant. Marshal once said, eyes heavy with apology. We need to talk about your connection to Diego Marin. That moment hit like a freight train. I stepped back, heart racing, knowing that from this point on, every second mattered. And I was no longer the hunter. I was the hunted. Before we jump into the final part, do me one favor. If you follow this far, you're part of this journey. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. What would you do if your name showed up in a criminal empire's core files? Because in part 7, it all explodes. They led me into the field office like I was a suspect. Cold eyes, hands near holsters. I knew the look. They'd already decided. They showed me screenshots, access logs, transactions signed with my credentials, offshore transfers, private messages linked to my ID. It was a masterpiece of digital forgery. And I was the ghost inside the system. I stared at the wall of evidence and said nothing, not because I was guilty, but because I finally saw the full shape of Diego's plan. He wasn't just dismantling my life. He was hijacking my identity to rebuild his empire under my name. Every corrupted HOA, every illegal seizure, every shell company, all of it tied back to credentials the system now believed were mine. I asked for 5 minutes alone. One agent hesitated. Another nodded. They left me in the room with a folder, a pen, and my thoughts. That's when I did it. From the lining of my jacket, I pulled a micro key Colin gave me. I inserted it into the port on the wall, bypassing the office's security firewall using an old Marshal override code, one I had written myself years ago during a cyber protocol redesign. Within seconds, I was in. Not just into the file system. Into Diego's core drive. The fingerprint match he coded for me. He didn't know I had once installed a trace echo, an invisible signature that, when mirrored back to its origin, showed the exact moment it was duplicated. The logs didn't just expose the frame-up. They revealed the exact node, the uplink, the laptop Diego used in real time. He was live, and he was connected. I called internal affairs back into the room, showed them the raw feed, pulled up the mirror logs. They went pale. Within minutes, a federal warrant was issued, and a tactical team was scrambled to the signal source, penthouse suite overlooking the city. By the time we arrived, Diego was gone, but not before leaving one final message on his screen. Nice move, Marshal. But you're too late. He had triggered a full data dump, scrambling years of evidence, erasing identities, wiping clean the trail. But what he didn't account for was the backup. Colin, the analyst who risked everything, had mirrored the drive 2 weeks ago. Quietly, redundantly. We had everything. Names, locations, financial records, bribe logs, even the identity of judges and officers quietly on Diego's payroll. The arrests began that same night. Over 40 coordinated raids across 3 states. Corrupt HOA presidents, real estate lawyers, developers, Some tried to flee. One fired on agents. But by dawn, it was over. And then came the final hit. One of the flagged shell companies owned a private jet scheduled for takeoff at a remote strip 2 hours south. Inside, the pilot was found unconscious. Diego never made it on board. But there, strapped into the back seat, was a duffel bag, fake passports, cash, and a necklace I gave my daughter when she turned 6. He was taunting me to the end. But then a silence. Days passed. No sign. Until a photo surfaced on a private intel forum. Grainy. Taken in Venezuela. A man in the background watching a news broadcast on a cracked screen about the bust. My video, The Downfall of the Empire. It was him. He's still out there. And he knows I'll never stop. Because this isn't just about me anymore. It's about every family he tried to crush, every home he invaded under false pretenses, and every neighborhood he turned into a front for fear. So I kept the badge. Not for the job, but for what it stands for. And now every time someone asks me what happened with the HOA, I smile. Because they thought they were auctioning off my land. They didn't know they were standing on federal ground. And the law never sleeps. Before you go, if this story hit you hard, tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, if your identity was stolen by a criminal empire, would you fight back? Because justice doesn't knock. It kicks down the door.